As the evening service had only just begun, Danger stepped through the restaurant's front door. Three men in black coats, their eyes colder than winter wind, and their hands buried deep in their pockets slipped into the warm glow of merinos, like three wolves wandering into a barn full of unsuspecting livestock. They did not look at the menu, did not glance around, did not search for a seat. They looked at her. Ava Collins did not notice it at first. She was too busy balancing a tray of plates, offering tired smiles to every table, pretending that life could not crush a 27-year-old woman who was trying to pay off her MBA loans while struggling to wire every spare dollar into the blind trust account her mother living far away had insisted upon. But someone else noticed. From a corner table, the most powerful man in Little Italy lifted his gaze. Dominic Kane. The man whom the neighborhood referred to by names never spoken in public sat utterly still like a human-shaped shadow. Yet his eyes tracked the three strangers with steady, deliberate precision, the curl of their unpleasant smirks, the low, sinister murmurs, the way their attention clung to Ava as if she were prey already claimed. When Ava walked past his table, her hand trembled slightly from exhaustion and an unfamiliar unease, and Dominic reached out gently, closing his fingers around her wrist. Not forceful, not possessive. It was an instinctive act of protection. He leaned in just enough, his voice low enough to slice through the air at her ear. "You are in danger. Pretend I am your father." Ava froze. Her mind went blank. "What? Why do not look?" He breathed, his breath brushing lightly against her skin. "They came for you." Ava's knees nearly buckled. She had no idea who they were or what was happening. But the truth embedded in Dominic's voice was enough to send a cold tremor through her heart. Then, before the eyes of the entire restaurant, the man whispered about in fear across Little Italy rose to his feet, placed a firm, warm hand on her shoulder, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Come on, sweetheart. Your father is taking you home." The three men jumped up as well, but one beat too late. Because in the instant their hands twitched toward their pockets, no one could quite see what Dominic did. They only knew he had moved long before danger could take shape. And what happened next not only saved Ava from a night of terror, it tore open a door to a past she never knew she had been living with. Stay with me until the end, because the real reason those three men came for Ava Collins will change everything you think you know about her. Before we move into the tense moments that follow, if you are watching this story and feel your own heartbeat beginning to race the way Ava's did as she stepped out of the restaurant, take a quiet second to subscribe to our channel, tap like and share this video so you will never miss any of the gripping chapters we release each day. Tell me where you are watching from. Leave a comment below with the name of your city or your country so I can see the corners of the world that this story has reached. Thank you for being here with us, and now, let us return to the fateful night Dominic had just pulled Ava into. Dominic tightened his hold on Ava's shoulder, guiding her out of the dining room before anyone could make sense of what was happening, and with a barely noticeable nod, his entire covert team scattered across the restaurant, covering every exit, as if they had been waiting for that signal for a very long time. Ava was pulled forward through the stunned stares of customers and staff. Yet no one dared to ask a single question, because the presence of Dominic always made the air grow thick as if it carried its own weight. Ava's feet followed him without thought, her heart pounding so hard she felt as if it were trying to flee her chest, and everything around her warped like a dream without explanation. Dominic pushed through the kitchen door, leading her through narrow corridors, where the scent of oregano and the heat from the ovens merged into something stifling, though none of it compared to the fear spreading through her body. When they reached the back door, two broad-shouldered men were already standing guard, their eyes sweeping the alley in two directions like trained hunting dogs. One of them spoke quietly to Dominic, saying that every eastern exit had been secured and the surveillance team was in position, while the western side was checking suspicious vehicles parked nearby. Ava heard it without understanding a word, her mind tilting as if someone had stolen the ground from beneath her. Dominic did not look at them. He gave a single nod and pulled Ava outside. The cold night air slapped against her face, making her shiver. She tried to stand on her own, without leaning too much into him, yet his hand remained firm on her shoulder, as if the smallest falter would make him catch all of her weight. She stammered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Where are you taking me? What is happening? Who are they? Why were they looking at me like that?" Dominic did not answer. His eyes swept across the dark alley where 3 more of his men were stationed. Someone reported movement at the end of the street, but Dominic waved a hand, signaling them not to stop but to keep moving. Ava was gently steered toward the black SUV pressed against the wall, its engine already running, as if everything about this night had been prepared long beforehand. Dominic opened the back door, placing his hand above Ava's head so she would not hit the frame the way careful fathers do with their children. That tenderness only frightened her more because she understood it was not accidental. This man knew something, and it had something to do with her. Ava grasped the edge of Dominic's coat, her voice shaking so badly it was almost inaudible. "Dominic, please say something. I do not understand. I do not know who they are. I have never done anything wrong. Please tell me what is happening." Dominic stayed silent for a few more seconds, his gaze fixed on something behind her, through the window, as if he were calculating every possible outcome. One of his men reported seeing the shadows of the same 3 men near the avenue. Dominic leaned in to whisper something, and they immediately scattered, some sprinting back toward the restaurant, while others moved up the block to cut off any pursuit. When he finally turned back to Ava, the look in his eyes was not the gaze of the ruthless man people whispered about, but of someone trying to shield her from something she was not yet strong enough to hear. "Get in the car, Ava. Right now." Ava swallowed hard and sank into the seat, her hands gripping the fabric of her uniform until her knuckles turned white. Dominic shut the door, moved around to the other side, slid in, and the SUV pulled away at once, weaving through the narrow back streets behind the restaurant, like a creature searching for a place to hide. Only when the roar of the engine blended with the strained silence inside the cabin did Ava find her voice again, soft as a plea. "Please, Dominic, tell me why." Dominic stared ahead, his features carved in the shifting shadows cast by the streetlights, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so low it sent a cold tremor down her spine. "When we reach a safe place, I will tell you everything. But from now until then, you cannot look back. You cannot panic. You cannot open this door. Because tonight, they will not stop until they have you." Those words made Ava feel as though her entire world tilted in a direction she had never imagined, as if the ordinary life of a young woman working a part-time job had been blown apart in a single shattering moment. And in that moment, Ava understood that her life had just stepped onto a path she was never prepared to walk. The SUV sped through the dim streets, city lights sliding across the windows in long, heavy streaks, and Ava curled into herself in the back seat, her fingers woven together so tightly they turned pale. She could hear every beat of her heart as if it were trying to escape her chest. The air inside the car grew thick, and Dominic sat silent as stone, his sharp gaze fixed on the road ahead, while every muscle in his body seemed pulled taut, like a wire stretched to its limit. Ava could not endure the silence another second. She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You said they came for me. Why, I don't know them. I've never seen them before." Dominic did not answer right away. He drew in a quiet breath, as though choosing the words that would wound her the least. Yet in that moment, Ava understood the answer would not be something she wanted to hear. Dominic glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes flickering with something between surprise and caution. "You truly don't know anything?" Ava frowned, her voice breaking. "Know what? What is happening? They called my name, they knew I worked at Marino's, they looked at me like I was something they had already laid claim to." "Why?" Dominic remained silent for several more seconds before speaking in a low voice, each word heavy as stone. "Because you are the daughter of Lena Collins." The sentence sent a chill down Ava's spine. "My mother. What about her?" Dominic turned to look at her for a long moment, and for the first time in the chaos of this night, Ava saw something in his eyes that was no longer the coldness of the Little Italy kingpin, but a very human hesitation. "Ava," he said slowly, almost gently, "your mother was not the ordinary woman you believe she was." Ava shook her head hard, her breath faltering. "What are you talking about?" "My mother was just an office worker. She changed jobs a few times, moved houses often. She always avoided trouble. She never hurt anyone." Dominic closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. "They came for you because they believe you know what your mother carried for 25 years. Something they are willing to kill to reclaim." Ava went rigid, her lips parting without sound. "My mother didn't. I don't. That's impossible." Dominic shifted slightly in his seat to see her more clearly. "Ava, for many years your mother kept running, not because of work, not because of financial hardship, but because of a blood debt tied to the Marcelli syndicate in Chicago." Ava stammered, feeling as if someone were describing a stranger. "My mother never said anything. She never—" Dominic cut her off, his voice dropping. "You haven't been told." His expression changed, losing its hardness, weighted now with a rare kind of sorrow. "Ava, there are things you were never told, not because they didn't trust you, but because they wanted to keep you in the safest place they could." Ava lowered her gaze as memories collided in her mind. The sudden moves, the times her mother insisted she not stay out late, the nights she stayed awake long after Ava had gone to bed. The phone calls Ava overheard by accident, but her mother always brushed off as wrong numbers. A cold shiver ran down Ava's spine. "Dominic, my mother. What was she involved in?" Dominic turned back to the road, his voice so low it could only be heard in the sealed space of the car. "I'll tell you everything from the beginning when we reach a safe place. But you need to know this first. Tonight they didn't come because of Marinos. They didn't come because of me. They didn't come for money or any transaction. They came for you, Ava, because you carry the Collins name, and because something your mother did 25 years ago is now coming back to collect its debt." Ava tightened her hands, her throat closing as if an invisible hand were gripping it. She searched Dominic's face for answers, but found only one terrifying truth: Dominic knew far more than he was saying, and she had no idea what kind of world she had just stepped into. Dominic spoke quietly, each word cutting through the air. "This is not random. This is a debt I've carried for 25 years. And it is also the debt your mother left behind." Ava felt her world tilt once more, as if the ground beneath her had turned to sinking sand, pulling her into a darkness she had never imagined she would ever touch. The SUV turned away from the crowded streets and sped into the industrial district on the edge of the city, where only the flickering yellow streetlights remained, and long rows of abandoned warehouses stood like soulless concrete corpses. And it was that very silence that made Ava feel as though she were being pulled deeper into a world that did not belong to her. She looked at Dominic, at the sharp stone-carved angle of his profile, and beneath that stillness, she sensed a current of calculation stretched tight like a string on the verge of snapping. When the car stopped in front of an old warehouse whose rusted metal door nearly swallowed the entrance, Ava did not dare ask anything more. She simply clung to the door handle to keep herself steady. Dominic stepped out first, signaling two men standing guard to open a side entrance. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil, cold steel, and the heavy chill of a place with no residents yet frequent use. Dominic returned to help Ava down from the car, his hand briefly at her elbow, offering a fragile, momentary sense of safety. She looked around the wide, empty room with nothing but a few wooden crates, a metal table, and a surveillance setup perched on a high shelf, where monitors showed the angles around the warehouse. Dominic moved toward a switch and turned on the low power lights, filling the space with a cold, muted white glow. "Sit there, Ava. We need to talk." Ava hesitated as she walked toward the lone metal chair near the wall, her hands locked tightly together as if clutching the last breath of normalcy. Dominic stood across from her, his arms folded, his gaze quiet but unyielding. Ava, what I'm about to tell you isn't easy to hear, but you need the whole truth if you want to survive what's happening. 25 years ago, your mother saved my life. Ava lifted her head, her eyes widening. Dominic continued, his voice unchanged, but each word carrying the weight of a past filled with blood and shadows. I was young then, just another worker in the system of a powerful family far from the position I hold now. I was caught in an internal purge. He paced for a moment, stopping directly in front of her, as though the memories forced him to move just to stay composed. A new accountant at the Marcelli family accidentally overheard a conversation. She heard the plan to have me killed. Ava felt the air stop in her lungs as fragments she had not understood from earlier suddenly came together with painful clarity. My mother heard that. Dominic nodded. She didn't know who I was. She only saw a young man about to be murdered for reasons she couldn't grasp. She came to my office, handed me a written note, and told me I had to leave Chicago that very night. She said if I stayed, I would die, and no one would ever know why. A strange ache spread through Ava's chest. The image of her mother, gentle, soft-spoken, afraid of trouble, clashed violently with the picture of a young woman daring enough to step between warring mafia factions to save a stranger, tilting Ava's entire sense of reality. Dominic went on, his voice lower, sinking into memories he rarely touched. I left immediately. 3 hours later, my entire office exploded. No one survived. If your mother hadn't warned me, I wouldn't be here tonight. Ava brought a hand to her mouth, unable to stifle the broken sound rising in her throat, pride and grief twisting inside her with crushing force. Your mother paid for that, Ava, Dominic said slowly, and for the first time, there was a trace of something like regret in his eyes. She didn't just save me. She took evidence of the crimes she overheard. From that night on, she became a target of the Marcelli syndicate. Dominic bowed his head slightly, as though pressed down by a debt that could never be repaid. And from that moment I carried a promise that if the day came when she could no longer run, I would protect the people she loved with everything I have. Ava felt her throat close. Dominic met her gaze directly. That is why they came for you tonight. Because they believe you are the last thread connected to what your mother took. Ava felt herself sinking into a truth more terrifying than any nightmare. In that single moment, she understood her life had begun to unravel because of something that happened 25 years ago, something for which she was now being forced to pay alongside her mother. Dominic signaled his men to disperse immediately, their steps heavy yet silent, urgent yet noiseless, echoing through the warehouse like an invisible army taking position to defend a final stronghold. One of them checked the main rolling door, another climbed onto a steel platform to watch through the ventilation slots, while 2 others opened the surveillance monitors and adjusted the infrared cameras placed around the perimeter. Tiny red lights flickered to life, signaling that the entire system was active, and in the vast open space of that temporary safe house, Ava felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life, like someone thrown into the center of a war she could not comprehend. Dominic spoke briefly into his radio, instructing that the northern side needed 2 additional men because the wind was strong enough to mask footsteps. Then he pulled a chair beside Ava, though his eyes never left the distant screens, where the black and white outlines captured every movement in the empty parking lot outside. Ava sat frozen, her arms wrapped around her chest, her breaths shallow and broken. My mother has been running for 25 years. The question slipped out of her like something torn from the deepest part of her, trembling, fragile, almost pleading for the answer to be no. Dominic did not answer immediately. At that moment, the metal door leading to the security room swung open, and a silver-haired woman with a short, sturdy frame stepped inside. Her gaze was sharp enough to make Ava straighten instinctively. Rosa Delgado studied Ava for a long time before letting out a soft breath, like someone releasing a weight carried for far too many years. You've grown. Her voice wasn't loud, but carried a heaviness that felt like she had waited a lifetime to say those words. Ava stared at the stranger, bewildered. She didn't know this woman had never met her, had never heard her mother mention the name. But in that moment, something in Rosa's eyes made Ava feel as though she were being looked at by someone who had witnessed everything her mother had ever endured. Dominic stood and introduced Rosa, then motioned for his team to continue sweeping the rear of the building. When only the three of them remained in the large room, Rosa moved closer, pulling a chair to sit across from Ava. Her voice was low, slow, and heavy with truths meant to wound. Your mother spent nearly half her life running from the Chicago Mafia. Ava shook her head at once, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. No, my mother. My mother was just an ordinary office worker. She never had anything to do with something like that. That's impossible. Rosa shook her head, and the sorrow in her eyes was so deep, it sent a chill through Ava. Lena was never ordinary child. She witnessed something that forced her to abandon everything. Her name, her friends, her job, the city she was born in. She carried a truth that was never meant to exist. Ava felt her throat tighten, as if the air around her had turned thick. Dominic leaned against the wall silent, but always within the edge of her vision. She looked up at him, desperate for some sign that he would deny what Rosa was saying. But Dominic only gave a small nod, confirming it all with the weight of a verdict. Ava shot to her feet, so fast the chair toppled behind her, her eyes wide, her breath shattering. No, my mother. She would have told me if this were true. She would never leave me alone with something like this. Rosa rose as well and reached out, touching Ava's arm gently, but Ava recoiled instinctively. She didn't want to hear anything else. She didn't want to believe any of it. But Rosa continued, her voice sinking as though gathering 25 years of sorrow into a single truth. She said nothing because she wanted to protect you. The less you knew, the longer you stayed alive. Dominic took one step toward her, his gaze firm but not cold, as though trying to keep her from shattering. Ava, your mother moved countless times. There were nights she fled just days after paying rent. She lived in fear she never wanted you to see. Ava felt her legs weaken, and she braced herself against the metal table for support. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother packing hurriedly when she was 10, the time she warned Ava never to open the door without checking the peephole, the night she changed numbers within hours of receiving a single phone call. All of it Ava had once dismissed as her mother being overly cautious. But now she saw them for what they were, the traces of someone who had been running for her life. Ava lowered her head as tears slipped between her fingers. Dominic stood beside her, close enough to anchor her, but not touching her, a steady wall against the storm tearing through her chest. And in that moment, Ava understood that no matter how desperately she tried to deny it, her life had been tied to this darkness long before she ever had a chance to choose another path. Ava nearly pulled herself out of Rosa's grasp, and with a sharp, instinctive movement, she snatched her phone from her pocket before rational thought could catch up. She dialed her mother's number so fast, her fingertips trembled, pressing the phone to her ear, and waiting, her heart pounding, as if the sound of that familiar voice alone could shatter the nightmare swallowing her. But only the long, steady ring echoed through the stillness of the warehouse, a cold sound that pierced Ava like thin needles. She dialed again, her hands shaking so badly she dropped the phone, scrambling to pick it up and try again and again, the third time. The fourth, the fifth. Each attempt answered only by that same, empty, merciless sound. Rosa watched her with eyes that held decades of unspoken sorrow, while Dominic stood a few steps away, his broad shoulders half lost in shadow, as if he had long accepted the outcome of her desperate calls, but still allowed Ava to face it on her own. Ava bit her lip to hold back her tears, yet her voice still cracked when she turned toward Dominic. Why isn't my mother answering? What happened? Why did she disappear like this? Dominic stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of Ava's chair, as though anchoring her to the ground. Ava, I have been searching for her for many years. He spoke slowly, as if each word needed careful choosing. You believed that the moves you and your mother made were just circumstances, but she never stopped running. In the last 7 years alone, your mother changed her name 3 times, lived at 4 different addresses, and twice vanished entirely from any public record. Ava's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around the phone, until her knuckles turned white. She could not reconcile the mother she knew, a woman who wanted nothing more than a peaceful life, with someone living as a shadow on the edge of a criminal world. Dominic continued, "The last trace I found of her was over a year ago. After that, she disappeared again, leaving nothing behind that could be traced. Everything we uncovered showed that she knew she was being hunted and kept herself one step ahead of them." Ava shook her head, hard tears spilling over her hand. "No, my mother had no reason to be hunted. She wasn't a criminal, she never hurt anyone. She was just my mother." Her voice broke on the last word. Rosa stepped forward, placing a gentle but firm hand on Ava's shoulder. "Lena was never allowed to live as an ordinary woman," Rosa said softly, each word cutting like a blade. "From the moment she heard what she should never have heard, her life no longer belonged to her." Ava looked at Rosa through tear-filled eyes, as if begging her to say it was all a mistake. Rosa went on. "When you were young, I saw her twice. Both times she looked exhausted, hollow, always glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to leap from the shadows. She told me that a single misstep, one moment too slow, and the Markelli syndicate would come for you." Ava covered her mouth to stifle a sob, but the tears came in waves. Dominic watched her, his expression no longer cold, but weighted with the helplessness of witnessing someone collapse under a truth he could not lighten. "Ava, your mother wasn't running from the police or from debt." Dominic said, his voice low but steady. "She was running for her life and for yours. And in her final years, the signs showed she was wearing down. Her movements became less cautious, her time in each place shorter. She knew she was running out of time to keep leading them away." Ava shuddered as though her body could no longer bear another piece of truth. But Rosa laid her hand over Ava's, the one clutching the phone, and squeezed gently. "You can't reach her now because Lena knows she cannot risk pulling you into this. She is protecting you with whatever strength she has left." In that moment, Ava felt her world shrink into a hollow, icy space. Her life, her job, the dinners she shared with her mother over video calls, the short messages, the nights her mother said she was tired and needed to rest. Suddenly, all of it felt painfully precious, almost unreal. And Ava realized she was no longer sure which of those recent calls had truly been her mother at all. In the silence of the safe house, so still, she could hear the wind whistle through the cracks in the metal door. Ava understood she was not only losing her mother, she was losing an entire life she once believed was whole. Ava was still gripping her phone as if one more connected call could undo everything she had just heard, but her hands trembled so violently that the device slipped through her fingers and hit the cold cement floor with a sharp, hollow crack that made her whole body jerk. Dominic bent to pick up the phone, but he didn't hand it back immediately. He held it in his palm, his eyes resting on Ava, with a rare hesitation, as though he were standing before a door he knew, once opened, would never allow her to return to the world she had known before. Ava saw it. She saw the heaviness in his gaze, and that alone made the air in her lungs turn to ice. "Dominic, please just tell me the truth. Where is my mother? What happened to her?" Her voice broke, spilling each word like glass. Dominic remained silent for a moment, far too long to be anything but ominous. Behind him, Rosa clasped her hands together, her eyes lowered as though she could not bear to witness what was coming. Dominic took one step closer to Ava, and with a low, quiet voice, stripped of all authority, and filled instead with something tightly compressed and unbearably sorrowful, he said, "Ava, your mother is gone." Ava stood motionless, her mind refusing to weave those sounds into meaning. Only 3 words, short, but they carved through her chest, freezing her heart the moment they struck. Dominic swallowed, then went on, each word landing as if it hurt him to speak it. She passed away about 3 weeks ago, in a small hospital in another state. No one claimed her body. No one knew her real name. Everything was recorded under an alias. Ava stumbled back, then back again, until her spine hit the cold metal wall. Her breath fractured. Her chest tightened violently. No, no, that's impossible. I texted her last week. She said she was resting. She said the medicine made her tired. Each sentence strangled her a little more. Dominic shook his head slowly. Those messages were scheduled, Ava. She automated them before she passed so you wouldn't panic. Ava felt her legs vanish beneath her. She leaned sideways, her hands grasping at air for something solid, then slid to the floor before Dominic could catch her. Pain flooded through her like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I can't. She tried to inhale, but the air refused to enter her lungs. Dominic dropped to his knees beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other bracing the back of her head to keep her from collapsing entirely. Ava, look at me. Breathe. Look at me. But Ava's vision blurred, her pupils widening, the edges of the world trembling as if it were about to shatter. Dominic signaled his people to keep their distance, then lifted Ava up, guiding her down the hallway behind the surveillance room where the lights were dimmer and the air felt less suffocating. She leaned almost her entire weight on him, her legs like water. Dominic set her down on a large wooden crate, his hand steady at the back of her neck to keep her upright. Deep breath. Ava, follow me. In, out. But all Ava managed were broken, choking sobs, her lips turning pale from lack of oxygen. Dominic placed his hand over her trembling one, his eyes sharp, yet unexpectedly gentle. Ava, your mother fought to keep you safe until her last moment. She ran for years so you would never have to face a night like this. None of this is your fault. The tears spilled uncontrollably down Ava's cheeks, dripping onto her wrist. In just a few hours, the world she knew had been torn apart, and now she had to swallow the truth that the only person she had left in her life had slipped away without a final word. Dominic tightened his grip on her shoulder, the last pillar still standing in the storm tearing through her. Ava lifted her head to look at him, her eyes blurry but burning with agony. Why? Why did no one tell me? Dominic met her gaze, his voice sinking into something like an apology, weighted with every unspoken regret. Because if you knew Ava, they would know too, and your mother chose to hide that truth, to keep you alive. Those words broke something inside her, and Ava collapsed into sobs, covering her face with her hands as her entire being fell apart. Dominic let her cry, let her fold into herself, let her break completely, because only when the truth had shattered her to the core could the battle she was about to face truly begin. Ava sat for a long time on the wooden crate in the dim hallway, the yellow light settling over her like a thin veil of pale sorrow. Her tears had stopped, yet her throat burned and her hands resting on her knees continued to tremble uncontrollably. Dominic stood a few steps away as if giving her just enough space to breathe, while staying close enough to catch her should she fall again. At last, Ava lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, but holding a flicker of clarity, as though the pain had opened a new fragile layer of awareness within her. Dominic, tell me everything. Don't hide anything anymore. I can't take guessing one more thing. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then moved forward and lowered himself to one knee before her so they were at eye level. His voice deepened as if he too were stepping back into a memory that cost him something to revisit. Ava, your mother didn't just run. She carried something the Marcelli Syndicate would never allow to be taken. Something a group like them would chase to the ends of the earth. Ava frowned, forcing herself to focus. What Dominic drew in a long breath as though preparing to speak a truth that refused to be spoken gently. Evidence. Records. Recordings. Information powerful enough to cripple a criminal network that had survived for decades. Things she stumbled into on the night she overheard that conversation. Ava felt her heart tighten again, this time not from grief, but from a hollow fear spreading up her spine. She took them. Dominic continued, his voice low and steady, each word placed with careful deliberation. She knew that if she gave them to the police, her life would be worth no more than paper. But she also knew that without them, she would have nothing to bargain with against those who wanted her dead. She chose the only option that gave her a little more time to live. Ava looked down at her hands, the tracks of dried tears like small fractures across her skin. But why do they think I know where those things are? Why target me? Dominic met her gaze and his eyes sharpened like a blade catching light. Because in their world, a daughter always knows where her mother hides her secrets. The words pierced Ava like a cold needle. No, I don't know anything. She never told me. I don't know anything at all. Dominic nodded. I believe you, but they don't. To them, you're the last link to Lena. And a living link is far more dangerous than a dead one. Ava felt her stomach twist, a wave of nausea rising, as if her body were rejecting the truth her mind could not yet process. Dominic went on, his voice softening, as he noticed the way she clutched the edge of the crate to keep from collapsing. The Marcelli syndicate believes your mother left something behind. A copy, a key, an instruction, something only her daughter would recognize. Ava shook her head weakly. If she had something like that, I would know. She never hid important things from me. A shadow of sorrow drifted across Dominic's eyes. Ava, she hid everything from you to protect you. Everything you don't know was the last wall she built around you. And when she began to weaken, those walls started to crack. Ava bit her lip, a sharp ache spreading across her chest once more. Dominic looked straight into her eyes, grounding her in the present. Tonight, they didn't come to the restaurant to watch. They came to take you. Because they believe you are the final key to what your mother stole. Ava shuddered, heat rising in her head before draining into cold. A faint question escaped her trembling lips. Then, what happens if I truly don't know anything? Dominic didn't answer right away. When he did, he repeated each word slowly, firmly, like hammering nails into the truth. They don't care whether you know or not. They only care that you never have the chance to find out. Ava closed her eyes, a late tear sliding down her cheek and falling onto her hand. When she opened them again, Dominic was still watching her with an expression that for the first time that night resembled something like mourning. Ava, your mother ran for 25 years to keep that secret alive. Now whether you want it or not, it's your turn to guard what remains. Ava sat motionless, her breath slowing as realization settled cold and heavy inside her. And in that moment, she understood that the truth did not end with her mother's death. It had only just begun with her. Dominic had barely finished speaking when a strange sound rose from the direction of the main door, faint but sharp like metal scraping against glass. Everyone in the room turned their eyes toward it at once. Ava felt the air shift, as though the pressure inside the warehouse had suddenly dropped, tightening around her chest. One of Dominic's men rushed to the control panel, his eyes glued to the screen. He tightened the strap of his gun and spoke in a low, urgent tone. Boss movement on the north side. 3 people, then 4. Now 6. Not ours. Dominic rose to his full height, instantly his eyes sharpening like a blade catching steel light. Ava had no chance to react before Rosa placed a hand on her shoulder, the movement quick and instinctive enough to make her flinch. They've found us, Rosa said, her voice heavy as lead. Ava felt her body go cold, sound echoing oddly as if she were submerged underwater. Dominic grabbed her hand, squeezing hard enough to pull her back to the present. Move. Now. Don't look back. Ava pushed to her feet, her legs trembling, but Dominic gave her no time to hesitate. He signaled 2 men toward the back, and within seconds the entire safe house erupted into a chaos that was terrifying yet organized. Dark silhouettes moved quickly, decisively, the clicks of weapon checks merging with the distant roar of an engine revving somewhere behind the warehouse. The surveillance monitors flickered rapidly now, showing multiple shadows closing in from 2 directions. They had arrived too fast, too precise for it to be coincidence. Dominic pulled Ava down the narrow hallway, the dim yellow bulbs casting long, distorted shadows behind them, like dark figures in pursuit. Each of Ava's steps felt like falling into emptiness, her heartbeat pounding in her skull alongside the hiss of wind slipping through metal seams. A heavy crash echoed from the back door. Someone had struck the steel from outside. Dominic motioned for his men to barricade it temporarily, then almost shoved Ava out into the open lot behind the warehouse. The cold night air slapped Ava's face, sharpening her senses for a moment. A license plate-less SUV waited with its engine rumbling like an agitated beast. A man swung open the back door and shouted urgently, "Go now!" Ava had barely set foot inside when 3 sharp bangs rang out, not gunshots, but the sound of bullets hitting metal. Dominic turned, immediately shielding her with his body, by instinct dragging her down onto the seat as he yelled at the driver, "Go!" The SUV lurched forward, launching into the darkness behind the industrial zone. Ava clung to the handle as the vehicle jolted violently over potholes and broken stretches of road. She twisted toward the rear window and saw 2 headlights emerging at the far end of the lane, closing in with increasing speed. Dominic spoke rapidly into his radio, ordering other vehicles to block the eastern path to avoid a pincer trap. But only seconds later, a black sedan shot out from a side road ahead, blocking their path. Dominic's driver wrenched the wheel, left tires screeching across asphalt, and Ava slammed into the door, pain shooting through her shoulder but no sound escaping her lips. Behind them, the pursuing cars surged closer. Their engines roared like a pack of wolves closing in on wounded prey. Dominic pulled out his phone and ordered the southern escape route opened. The driver understood immediately and swung sharply into a narrow passage between 2 abandoned warehouses. The SUV bucked so violently, it felt like it might lift off the road at any moment. Ava gripped the seat, her head spinning, yet she was clear enough to see one of the cars behind them turning into the same path, shrinking the distance. The SUV's taillights smeared red streaks across the cracked asphalt as they burst through an old fence, plowing onward onto a dirt road leading toward the main route. Just as they emerged from the shadow of the industrial maze, the 2 pursuing vehicles slowed, hindered by the fallen barrier that had crashed down right after Dominic's SUV slipped past. Ava heard Dominic exhale heavily, but he didn't lower his guard for even a moment. When they reached the broader road, the streetlights appeared one by one, distant silhouettes of low buildings flickering into view. Dominic looked at Ava, then his eyes dark but resolute. "They won't stop until they get you." Ava swallowed her throat, burning her entire body, trembling with adrenaline and fear twisting together. And as the SUV continued cutting through the night, Ava understood that this chase was only the beginning. The SUV drove for a long stretch before Dominic instructed the driver to turn onto a narrow road, nearly swallowed by darkness, where old trees cast heavy shadows across the damp ground. Ava still hadn't recovered from the chase. Her hands clutched the seat so tightly, her wrists had turned pale, and her breathing remained shallow and uneven, as if she had run miles barefoot. Dominic glanced at her once more before returning his focus to the road ahead. His eyes taut with a vigilance Ava was beginning to understand, one that never truly left him, not even for a moment. When the vehicle stopped before an old wooden house tucked beneath dense branches, Ava saw Rosa already waiting on the porch, as though she had known they would come. The house looked worn and tired from the outside, yet the warm yellow light spilling from the windows carried an unexpected invitation, as if it held a secret untouched by the world beyond. Dominic opened the door and helped Ava out, his hand steady on her elbow despite her trembling. Rosa approached her, expression gentler than it had been in the safe house, though a deep, unspoken sorrow still lingered in her eyes. "Come in, child. It's safer here." Ava followed her inside, and immediately the scent of old pinewood jasmine tea and the soft heat from a small fireplace eased something in her chest, as if the house existed solely to gather those who were falling apart. Dominic closed the door, checked the lock once, then took a seat nearby. Rosa didn't look at him. Instead, she set a teapot on the table and poured Ava a cup, her hands trembling slightly, perhaps from the memories dragged up after 2 decades of silence. Ava wrapped her fingers around the cup, the warmth seeping into her skin and anchoring her back into the present. Why did my mother choose this place? Why Marinos? The question escaped her before she could stop it, her voice raw and hoarse. Rosa studied her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, as though what she was about to say belonged not only to Ava, but to herself after years of carrying it alone. Because your mother always wanted you where someone was watching, somewhere with eyes that could recognize danger. Ava's brows knit together as she recalled the 3 years of college when every job she considered was met with her mother's disapproval, her insistence that certain workplaces weren't suitable, weren't safe, though Ava had never understood why. Dominic leaned back slightly, continuing where Rosa left off. Marino's isn't an ordinary restaurant, it's my territory. Everyone who walks through those doors is observed, monitored, accounted for. No one can get close to the staff without being noticed. Ava's eyes widened, her hand freezing around the teacup. My mother. She knew that Dominic nodded. She watched me from a distance for years. Not to find me, but to avoid her enemies. She knew that anywhere touched by my presence was a place the Marcelli syndicate would instinctively avoid. A chill ran down Ava's spine. She could not picture her mother quietly studying the safe zones of a crime lord just to protect her. Rosa sat beside her, laying a warm, steady hand over Ava's, as if passing on the truth through touch. Lena always said one thing, that the best job for you wasn't the one with good pay, but the one where someone would spot danger before you did. Ava lowered her head as memories crashed over her like shards of broken glass. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind, words she once dismissed as needless worry. Don't work in places that empty out at night. Don't stay somewhere with a constantly changing staff. You need a place where the owner watches everyone who walks through the door. And suddenly, Ava understood her mother had never chosen a job because it was close to home, close to school, or offered better pay. She chose based on the level of surveillance the environment provided. Dominic added quietly, his voice no longer carrying the sharp edge it once did. When you came to interview at Marino's, I knew immediately you had a connection to Lena. Not because of your looks, but because of the way you scanned the room. You watched everything on instinct. Ava drew in a shaky breath, her throat tightening. Dominic held her gaze. Lena prepared you, Ava. You didn't know it at first, but your mother knew that sooner or later the darkness would come looking, and she wanted you to stand in the one place they wouldn't reach easily. Ava set the teacup down, its warmth no longer enough to steady her trembling hands. When she looked from Rosa to Dominic, she felt something forming inside her, a truth taking shape, no matter how fiercely she fought it. From the job she worked to the places she lived to the warnings her mother whispered to her throughout childhood, nothing had been coincidence. Her mother had spent an entire lifetime building a circle of protection around her. And now that circle had been shattered. Ava sat in silence for a long time, as though Rosa's words were still clinging to her skin, seeping into layers of memory she had buried for years. The firelight flickered across her face, casting soft amber streaks that deepened the exhaustion in her swollen eyes. Dominic leaned against the wall by the window, arms folded across his chest, his gaze sharp but heavy with thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and weighted, like a conclusion he wished he didn't have to confirm. Lena didn't run to live longer. She ran so she would have enough time to send you what she needed you to have. Ava's head snapped up, her heartbeat stumbling. Send me. What? Dominic looked directly at her. A package. Ava felt the blood in her veins stop moving. Dominic continued. She sent it about 3 days before she died, under her last alias, through a postal route that's nearly impossible to trace. But there's a problem. That package was never sent to your home address. Ava straightened, her breath suddenly quickening. Why? If she wanted me to have it? Dominic shook his head. Lena knew your home had been watched for years. If she sent it there, it would have been taken before you ever saw it. Then, where did she send it? Dominic folded his arms more tightly, his gaze sharp enough to cut through the space between them. She sent it to the one place she knew it would never fall into the wrong hands. A place you visited constantly. A place with guards. A place Ava blinked once, then her eyes widened as a memory snapped into place. Marino's. Dominic nodded immediately without hesitation. Yes, the restaurant receives mail for its staff in Enzo's office. And your mother knew that. Ava felt goosebumps rise along her arms as scattered details fused into a chilling picture. The times she saw Enzo dumping piles of mail onto the desk. The small packages employees forgot to claim. The metal mailbox in the back office that no one paid attention to. She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her shirt. Oh my God. All this time I've been working at the very place my mother sent the package. I've walked past that mail cabinet how many times? Dominic stepped closer and sat across from her so their eyes met evenly. Lena knew you wouldn't open it if you happened to see it. She believed you would only open it when you were pushed into a corner, when you had no choice but to face it. Ava leaned back in her chair, feeling as though she had been lifted from the ground and dropped hard. Rosa placed a hand over hers, her voice lowering. Lena didn't want you touching it while you still had a chance at a peaceful life. But when every shield fell, that was the only thing left. Ava pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to breathe through the spinning in her mind. Her mother had known she was dying. She had known the Marcelli syndicate would come. She had known Ava would one day be forced to confront the darkness she'd been running from her entire life. And her mother had sent her final message, her final secret, her final hope, to the place Ava worked every single day. Dominic's voice dropped to a low, steely certainty. That package is the only thing they're after. If they get it, before we do, everything Lena protected for 25 years disappears. Ava lifted her gaze, her pupils tightening with fear, but brightening with a spark of resolve. Then we have to go to Marino's. Dominic nodded slightly, his eyes dimming for a moment before sharpening again. But only when we're sure we're not being followed. They already know the safe house is compromised. They'll try to anticipate your next move. Rosa rose, pulling the curtains shut, as if to shield them from the night outside. We'll prepare another car. You can't go in the same one. Ava tightened both hands, the trembling still there, but something stronger rising within her, something firmer than fear. Her mother had sent one final message before she died, and it was waiting in the last place she expected. She would have to return to where everything began. Marino's was no longer just a workplace. It was where the answers lay, and Ava knew that once that package was opened, her life would never be the same again. The air inside Rosa's small wooden house grew heavy, almost thick enough to touch after the truth about the package settled over them. Ava sat quietly for a long while, her fingers interlaced, the warmth of the cooling teacup still cupped in her hands, like a small anchor keeping her from slipping back into panic. Dominic remained by the window, the curtains shifting slightly, each time he moved, his eyes sharp as blades, as they scanned the darkness outside for any sign of danger. No one spoke for several long, suffocating minutes, until Ava drew a deep breath and spoke in a hoarse but steady voice. We have to go back to Marino's. Dominic turned toward her, his gaze darkening as though weighing whether Ava truly understood what waited for her beyond the safety of this old house. It will be dangerous. If the Marcellis predicted our next move, Marino's might already be compromised. Ava pressed her lips together, swallowing a tremor of fear that threatened to rise again, but she did not back down. I know, but that package, it's the only answer left. I can't let them get it before we do. Dominic studied her for another moment, then nodded once sharply, as though acknowledging that Ava was no longer the girl paralyzed by fear. Good. But we do this my way. He signaled two of his men to enter the room. We need 3 decoy vehicles, 3 routes, and new plates immediately. Sweep everything within a 3-mile radius around Marinos. No one reveals the target. They nodded and left at once. No hesitation, no questions, just the silent, precise movement of men trained for crises where one wrong breath could cost a life. Ava watched them go, a strange mixture of dread and awe rising within her, as the criminal underworld unfolded before her like a war machine operating with flawless coordination. Dominic approached, his voice low, but no longer carrying the cold edge he reserved for enemies. Ava, going with me isn't an easy choice. Once we step outside this door, there will be no turning back until we retrieve what your mother left behind. Ava lifted her head, her eyes still swollen with exhaustion, yet burning with a new, unmistakable resolve. I'm done running. My mother spent half her life keeping that secret alive. I won't let her die for nothing. Dominic held her gaze for a long, quiet moment, as though he saw something in her eyes that reassured him. Finally, he nodded. All right, get ready. We leave in 30 minutes. Rosa stood immediately, gathering a few small items into a cloth bag, then handed Ava a thick coat. Tonight is cold, and you'll need this. Ava took the coat, a sudden ache rising in her chest as she remembered how her mother used to do the same whenever Ava forgot hers on the way to school. The grief stirred again, but this time it didn't crush her, it propelled her forward. Outside, the low rumble of engines starting broke the night's silence. Dominic guided Ava to the back door, where another SUV waited, its exterior coated with a thick layer of dust to mask its presence. Before she climbed in, Dominic placed a firm, grounding hand on her shoulder. Once we're there, you do not leave my side. You don't walk alone, you don't listen to anyone except me or Rosa. And if something happens, you drop down immediately and don't look up. Ava nodded, swallowing the rising wave of fear. I understand. Dominic looked at her for another breath, then opened the door. Ava climbed inside, the cold seat pressing against her back, making her shiver. But when the door shut and sealed her inside the dim space, her focus sharpened. The SUV rolled away from Rosa's house, bumping over dirt paths and passing beneath shadowy trees that whispered secrets into the night. Through the glass, Ava saw 3 other vehicles emerge from different directions, moving in formation, silent and disciplined, maintaining equal distance, like a protective wall around her. Dominic sat beside her, his stare fixed on the road as if charting every possible threat before it appeared. When they merged onto the route leading toward the city center, Ava saw the faint glow of the city lights rising in the distance, a maze of shimmer that felt both familiar and foreign. But this time, she wasn't just returning to a workplace. She was returning to the place where her mother had hidden the final secret of her life. And no matter what the night would bring, Ava knew she would not be the same person when she walked out of Marino's again. The SUV stopped 2 blocks from Marino's, hidden in the shadows of an abandoned parking lot where the street lamps had long gone dark, leaving only the faint moonlight spilling thin, cold streaks across the ground. Dominic signaled for his team to scatter and sweep the area, their silhouettes dissolving into the night, as if the darkness itself had created them. Ava sat still in her seat, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles went pale, her breath uneven as she stared at the blurred sign of Marino's in the distance. Only hours ago, it had been her workplace, filled with the clatter of dishes, the smells of cooking, Marco's grumbling over missing staff. Now it was a battleground. Dominic opened the door beside her and leaned down. Let's go. His voice was low, firm, grounding her like an anchor, keeping her from being swept away by the tremor in her chest. Ava nodded and stepped out, her knees unsteady, but her resolve intact. They crossed the narrow alley behind the restaurant where the smell of old oil and trash mingled in the cold air, and Dominic used his private key to unlock the side door leading into the kitchen. The metal door creaked faintly, making Ava hold her breath. Inside the kitchen was pitch black except for the pale wash of the industrial fridge, casting thin bluish lines across the tiles. Dominic pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence, then gestured for 2 of his men to move ahead. They checked every corner beneath tables behind spice racks, even the dishwashing station. After several minutes, they signaled clear. Ava followed Dominic up the narrow staircase to Enzo's office, her hand brushing the icy railing that bit into her fingertips. With every step, her heartbeat grew louder, as though her body understood something was waiting at the top of those stairs. The office door was slightly ajar, just as Enzo always left it. Dominic entered first, his hand hovering near his hip, as if ready to draw his gun. Once he confirmed the room was empty, he stepped aside for Ava to enter. The soft glow of a small desk lamp revealed the familiar shapes in the room: the worn wooden desk, the smell of paper, the ticking of the wall clock, and the metal filing cabinet in the corner, the one every employee knew Enzo used to stuff all their mail into. Ava stood before it, her hands trembling as she reached for the handle. "Mom, did you really send me something?" She inhaled deeply and pulled the drawer open. Papers and envelopes shifted and sagged. Dominic lifted his flashlight and shone it inside, illuminating the bottom shelf. There, fallen behind the drawer mechanism and covered in dust, was a brown-wrapped package shoved all the way to the back. Ava recognized the slanted handwriting immediately. Colin's kitchen. The moment her fingers brushed the paper, a tingling shock ran up her arms, as though her body understood before her mind did. Dominic stepped back slightly, giving her space. Ava held the package against her chest, her hands pressing into the weight inside, as if she were holding a surviving fragment of her mother's life. She peeled back the wrapping, each layer unfolding into the stillness, until the air itself seemed to thicken. Inside was a small silver metal box dulled by time, its edges scratched as though it had been knocked around. There was no lock, no emblem, only a faint engraving at the corner, the letters L and C intertwined. Ava traced them with her fingertip, and tears rose instantly. Dominic watched her silently. If this was the object a criminal syndicate had hunted for 2 decades, then what lay inside could not simply be sentiment. Ava laid the box on the desk. Beneath it was a pale yellow envelope unsealed. With trembling fingers, she opened it and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The moment she saw the soft handwriting, her knees nearly gave out. Lena Collins. The mother who called her every night during her late shifts. The mother who never forgot her birthday, who never let her leave for school without checking if she had her coat. That mother had left her final words in the handwriting, trembling across this page. Ava opened the letter just enough to read the first line, but the moment her eyes reached it, her throat seized, as though invisible hands were closing around it. My beloved daughter. Dominic stepped closer and placed a steady hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, because he knew she was standing on the fragile threshold between the life she had lived and the truth she could no longer avoid. Ava closed the letter quickly, pressing it to her chest, as though reading another word might shatter her heart entirely. "You're not ready to read it yet, are you?" Dominic asked softly, his voice carrying a rare gentleness. Ava nodded, her lips trembling too hard to speak. Her mother was gone, but her mother's voice lay in her hands. The metal box was still sealed, the letter barely opened, and Ava stood in Marco's office staring at them both with a grief so sharp it felt like the whole world was hanging by a single fraying thread. A truth waiting to be uncovered, a secret her mother had spent an entire lifetime protecting. But just as Ava inhaled deeply to steady herself and reach for the box, a soft noise echoed from downstairs, and Dominic instantly raised his hand, signaling her to stop. Ava shut the lid of the box and clutched the letter. The truth would have to wait a little longer, because the darkness had found its way to Marino's for the second time that night. The noise from downstairs sounded only once, but it was enough for Dominic to react instantly. He lifted a finger to his lips for silence and pulled Ava away from the desk, pushing her into the shadowed wall behind the door. His eyes sharpened like steel, his entire body coiled with the readiness of a man who could spring into danger at any moment. One of his men rushed up the stairs, and as soon as he reached the office doorway, he whispered urgently. Boss movement behind the kitchen, 2 unfamiliar cars in the alley, They've tracked us. Dominic didn't waste even a heartbeat. He turned to Ava. Take the box and the letter. Move. Ava grabbed the metal box and shoved the letter into her coat pocket, her heart pounding so violently it felt as if it might burst free. The footsteps below grew louder, the clank of metal hitting walls, the thud of a door forced open. There was no time left. Dominic gripped her wrist and pulled her down the back exit of the office, racing through a narrow corridor that led straight to the rear of the restaurant. The smell of old grease and the cold burst of air from the walk-in freezer swept across them as Dominic shoved open the metal door leading to the parking lot. Darkness, rushing in like a black shroud, swallowing everything. Go straight to the SUV. Don't look back. Don't stop. Their footsteps echoed across the wide, empty lot behind Marino's, where the only light came from a flickering street lamp, struggling to stay alive. Ava ran beside Dominic, the box pressed against her chest, knocking the breath from her lungs with every stride. They were only a few dozen yards from the vehicle when a figure stepped out from the corner of the building, then another, then a third. 3 men. Dark eyes, dark clothes. The glint of raised guns catching the weak light like serpents made of steel. Dominic spun instantly, yanking Ava behind him and forcing her down, just as the first shot exploded through the air. The sound ricocheted across the lot, jarring Ava's senses as a bullet clipped the concrete column behind her, spraying dust and stone across her hair and face. Dominic drew his gun in one impossibly quick motion, just a dark blur in front of her eyes, and fired twice. One shot struck the leg of the closest attacker, sending him crashing to the ground with a sharp cry. The other 2 split apart, flanking from opposite sides, forcing Dominic to pivot rapidly to shield both angles. Go, Ava, get to the car! He barked, but Ava stood frozen in place, her legs stiff as if anchored to the ground. Another shot rang out closer, sharper, and she saw Dominic jolt in front of her. He staggered 1 step, his arm faltering, and she saw blood bloom through his sleeve, spreading down his arm in a dark, frightening stain. But he did not retreat, not for a single fraction of a second. Dominic turned back and shoved Ava forward. Get in the car, now! Ava ran while looking over her shoulder, her heart twisting as she saw Dominic using his own body as a shield, standing between her and the muzzles aimed their way. One of his men appeared from the shadows and fired a burst that forced the attackers to retreat. Dominic seized the moment, pulling Ava with him, both of them running hard toward the idling SUV. He gripped her arm, guiding her with unyielding force as they dashed across the final stretch. When they were only a few steps from the door, another shot cracked through the air, clean, sharp, deadly. Ava didn't see the bullet's path. She only heard Dominic's soft hiss of pain near her ear as his arm tightened around her, pushing her lower, shielding her completely. He'd been hit again. She felt it in the violent twitch of his muscles, the brief catch in his breath, but he still didn't allow her to slow even for an instant. They reached the SUV. One of Dominic's men yanked the rear door open and practically hauled Ava inside, while Dominic threw himself in after her, his hand at the back of her head to keep her from hitting the frame. The door slammed shut, just as another volley of bullets hammered into the metal exterior with a shower of warped, ringing impacts. Go! Dominic ordered, his voice rough as gravel. The SUV shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bowstring. Ava twisted around, her heart still thudding wildly, to see Dominic pressing his hand against the wound on his arm, blood seeping through his fingers in slow, dark drops. His gaze never left the windows, his vigilance unwavering even as pain tightened the corners of his eyes. Ava trembled. Dominic, you're hurt. He didn't look at her, his voice low and steady as iron. As long as you're alive, that's all that matters. And as the engine roared into the night, Ava realized she had just witnessed something no one believed possible. A feared kingpin, a man colder than the shadows themselves, had thrown his body over hers. And he had bled for her, not just because of a promise, not just because of a debt to a dead woman, but because of Ava herself. The SUV tore through the night for nearly another half hour before Dominic ordered a second vehicle change, then a third, each swap severing more of the trail behind them until every hint of pursuit faded. At last they stopped at an abandoned house deep in the outskirts where dirt roads lay beneath a thin veil of dust, and the city lights were nothing more than faint distant specks, low on the horizon. The house looked forgotten by time, its dark slate roof and peeling wooden walls suggesting decades of neglect. Yet when Dominic pushed open the door, Ava immediately sensed it was no ruin at all. There was electricity heating a stocked medical cabinet, and unmistakable signs that this place had been quietly prepared for moments exactly like this. Dominic loosened his grip on his wound just long enough to check the perimeter, then instructed two of his men to secure the outer grounds. Only when everything was deemed safe did he lower himself into a wooden chair near the window, blood still trailing slowly down his arm as his gaze remained fixed on Ava, waiting for her breath to steady. Ava stood in the center of the room, the metal box clutched tightly against her chest as though it were the only thing anchoring her to a world she felt slipping away beneath her feet. At last, Dominic spoke, his voice low but without urgency. "Ava, open it. The truth is inside." She stepped toward the low table, set the box down, and her palms trembled faintly as she touched the lid. The coldness of the metal seeped into her skin, pulling her backward into a time she thought she knew, into the shadowed corners of a life her mother had hidden from her. Ava drew a deep breath and lifted the lid. The soft, metallic click echoed through the quiet room. Inside there was no money, no keys, no jewelry, nothing of material value. What sat within was far more dangerous than any ransom-thin envelopes. A stack of loose photographs, a small worn notebook, and a micro-cassette tape with a handwritten label. Ava lifted each item out and laid them on the table, then picked up the first photograph. The instant her eyes met the image, her hand trembled so violently the picture slipped from her fingers. It showed a dark warehouse, a man bound and forced to his knees, and three faces surrounding him. Their faces were clear. Men whose names had appeared in disappearances the news once whispered about. Men everyone in the underworld knew, but no one dared name aloud. And her mother had captured them. Dominic retrieved the fallen photograph, glanced at it for barely a second, before his expression deepened, not in surprise but in recognition. "This is the Salerno killing from 2000. No one ever found evidence." Ava felt her mind spin. She tore open the next envelope. More photographs, a cash exchange between two Martelli bosses, a victim shoved underwater, a black bag being dragged from a trunk, faces laughing in the middle of crimes. All meticulously documented by someone who understood how to remain unseen, yet refused to look away. Ava dropped the stack when her hand went numb. And there was more. In the box lay a small notebook, its cover worn, its corners softened with age. She opened to the first page. Inside was her mother's handwriting, line after line packed with names, dates, bank accounts, money trails, and figures so vast Ava felt her skin prickle. Dominic picked up one of the notes, his eyes scanning swiftly. This is their entire money laundering network for almost 2 decades. If this ever reached the FBI, the Marcelli syndicate would collapse overnight. Ava sank into a chair, her hand covering her mouth as tears spilled unchecked. Her mother, the quiet woman, the gentle one, the one who loathed conflict, had carried a bomb in her hands for 25 years. A bomb made of evidence. A bomb made of truth. A bomb capable of destroying an empire. And she had carried it alone. Dominic looked at Ava, his voice soft in a way she had heard only a few times tonight. She didn't just run. She kept hundreds of victims alive. She protected people who will never even know her name. Ava cried openly now, not out of fear, but out of a grief braided with awe, her heart pulled in opposite directions by pain and pride. Dominic moved closer and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Lena carried all of it, so you could remain whole. You never knew, because she refused to let the darkness stain you," the way it stained her. Ava covered her face, hot tears slipping between her fingers. Only now did she understand the life her mother had lived. Not a life of fleeing, a life of fighting, fighting alone, fighting in silence, fighting for her. And now the secret lay in Ava's hands, so heavy it seemed the entire room tilted beneath its weight. She understood in that moment that the moment the box opened, her fate opened with it, and the path before her no longer had a way back. Ava remained seated at the old wooden table, unmoving, while the photographs of violence, the financial ledger, and the USB drive lay before her like a silent death sentence, waiting for someone to open and announce the verdict. The room was absolutely still, broken only by the faint rhythmic hum of the heater and the heavy, uneven sound of Ava's breathing as she tried to adjust to the feeling that her entire world had just shifted off its axis. Dominic leaned against the wall, the arm grazed by a bullet, hastily bandaged, but still bleeding, yet his eyes were sharp and steady, as if the rest of his body could collapse at any moment, except for that gaze. He watched Ava for a long time before finally speaking. "Ava, you need to hear what I'm about to say, not from me as a man in power, but from someone who owes your mother his life." Ava swallowed, lifting her gaze toward him, exhausted, but no longer avoiding the truth. Dominic bent slightly over the table, picked up the small tape among the documents, and held it up beneath the warm yellow light. What's in this box could destroy the entire Marcelli syndicate. Not a few members, not one branch, the entire network. 2 decades of crimes, 2 decades of blood and money. Ava stared at the tiny object in Dominic's hand, feeling as though she were looking at a short, sharp blade capable of cutting through an entire city. He set the tape back on the table, straightened, and faced her fully. "You have 2 choices." His voice wasn't raised, but every word landed with the weight of heated steel. "The first choice is to give everything to the FBI. All of it. The photos, the ledger, the recordings, the documents. They will move you into witness protection immediately, give you a new identity, a new life, and send you somewhere the Marcellis will never reach. You will disappear from the world. No one will find you. No one will know who you are." Ava felt her chest tighten. She would lose Marino's, lose school, lose friends, lose her mother's grave, lose herself. Dominic continued, his voice even, but his eyes sharpening. "But if you choose that path, you will never return to your old life. Not ever. You will carry a new name, a new face in the system, a new history. Everything about Ava Collins will be erased." Ava clasped her hands together, her palms cold as stone. Dominic lowered his voice, as though crossing into the territory of something difficult to speak aloud. "The second choice is to go with me." Ava looked up. Dominic stepped closer, his shadow dimming part of the overhead light. "We don't turn anything over to the FBI. We use it the way this world truly operates, beneath the surface. We find the weaknesses of every man in the syndicate, break them apart piece by piece, destroy the network from the inside out, and end them for good." The air in the room thickened. Dominic looked at her, and his eyes carried no command, only a stark truth. "But you need to understand this. Coming with me means there is no law. It means blood will spill. It means no witness protection, no new identity. You will still be Ava Collins, but you will never be safe the way you once were." Ava closed her eyes, rubbing her temples as though trying to quiet the storm inside her, but her mind filled with 100 overlapping voices. Become a witness and live under a false name, running forever. Or stay in the real world, face her mother's enemies, fight the battle Lena never had a chance to finish. Dominic spoke more softly, but every word cut through the fog in her thoughts like a blade. "I will protect you, with everything I have. But if you choose my path, you will face the darkness the same way Lena did." Ava opened her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Dominic stood in front of her, very close, close enough for her to see the fatigue etched into the eyes of the man who had thrown himself between her and gunfire. He said quietly, "You owe me nothing. but you owe your mother a decision. You must choose the life she would want you to continue." Ava looked down at the open box. Photos of victims, recordings of negotiations, dirty money trails, her mother's handwriting in the small worn notebook. Every piece was made of blood, fear, and years Lena had carried alone. Her mother had fought so Ava could live in peace. But that peace had died with her. Ava placed both hands on the edge of the table, leaning into it, as though standing at the brink of a great abyss, its bottom filled with the shape of her own destiny. Dominic watched her, not pushing, not urging, simply waiting. And finally, Ava's voice slipped out soft as breath. I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk into your world." Dominic answered without hesitation. "Ava, no one is strong enough at the beginning. Not your mother, not me, only the choice makes us strong." Ava trembled once more. Run or fight, disappear or face the truth, keep her name Ava Collins or bury it to survive. And when she looked again at the box, at everything her mother had sacrificed a lifetime to protect, she knew suppressing the fear would not be easy. But living without facing the truth would be far harder. In that moment, Ava understood that the choice she made now would reshape the entire course of her life. And even before she spoke it aloud, Dominic already saw the answer forming in her eyes. The room was so silent it felt as if the entire world were holding its breath waiting for Ava's answer, but the moment didn't get the chance to stretch, because a shattering crack of glass exploded from the back window, followed by the sharp hiss of bullets cutting through the air like deadly warnings. Dominic reacted before Ava could even register what was happening. He lunged, pulling her down to the wooden floor and pressing her head against his chest, while gunshots thundered from outside. Shards of glass rained onto his back, some catching on the sweat-damp, blood-stained fabric of his shirt. One of his men burst into the room shouting urgency crackling in his voice. "They've found us, at least 3, maybe more. Front and back are surrounded." Dominic yanked Ava up instantly, not giving her a second to freeze or panic. "With me. Now." Ava stumbled after him down the narrow hallway toward the garage, but as they rounded the corner, a figure shot out from the darkness with terrifying speed. He wore a black coat, his face hidden, gun already raised and aimed at Ava. It all happened in a single breath. Ava froze. The gunman squeezed the trigger. Dominic threw himself in front of her, a reflex born not of choice, but of instinct, as natural as breath. The gunshot detonated in the tight corridor, the sound so loud Ava's ears rang. Dominic jerked backward half a step, his shoulder convulsing, a strangled sound catching in his throat, but he forced himself upright again, turning and firing 2 precise shots that dropped the attacker instantly. Ava saw the bullet grazing his ribs, tearing flesh, but missing vital organs, seeping through his dark shirt and dripping onto the floor in heavy metallic drops. Dominic braced himself against the wall to stay upright, his shoulders trembling, his breathing sharp and uneven, yet his eyes remained fixed on the shadows of the hallway, hunting for the next threat. Ava rushed to him, gripping his arm, the heat of his blood flooding across her palm and sending a cold shock through her entire body. "Dominic, Dominic tightened his hold on her wrist, his voice raw and rough but still sharp as a blade. "I'm fine. As long as you're alive." Another gunshot cracked from the rear entrance, making Ava flinch, and she realized there was more than one attacker. Dominic shoved her into the garage where their 4th vehicle, a battered sedan with fake plates, waited with its door open. One of his men yelled that they had to leave immediately because the upper floor had been breached. When Dominic tried to step forward, his leg buckled slightly, and Ava caught him with both arms, holding him up despite her own shaking limbs. Dominic inhaled sharply, then looked at her with an expression Ava had never seen in him, a blend of fierce pride and unspoken worry, strength and fragility bound together. "Let's go," he said as if giving an order, though his voice was softer than usual. Ava stepped back just enough for him to move toward the car, though her breath caught when she saw the streak of blood trailing behind his footsteps. As the sedan lurched away from their third hideout, gunfire still crackled behind them like war drums pounding inside Ava's mind. Each shot a reminder that if Dominic hadn't thrown himself in front of her twice, she would already be dead. Dominic leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes for a brief instant, as though fighting to stay conscious, his hand pressed hard against his side to stem the bleeding. Ava turned toward him, her eyes wide, heart splintering with each shallow breath he took. Dominic, why do you keep shielding me like that? You're hurt and you still. Dominic opened his eyes, looking at her with a weight she had never seen before. Because you're their target. Because I made a promise. And because your mother saved my life 25 years ago. I won't let her daughter die by their hands. Ava's fist tightened, a wave of emotion crashing into her chest so hard it stole her breath. For the first time, she understood the full shape of what was unfolding around her. This wasn't just a chase, not just a secret, not just a handful of incriminating photographs. This was blood. Life. Her mother's past. The Martelli syndicate's crimes. Dominic's promise upheld with his own body. This was the price others were paying so she could live. And in that moment, watching Dominic grit his teeth through the pain while still scanning the road ahead, knowing 2 bullets meant for her had struck him. Instead, Ava realized something for the first time in her life. She could no longer stand on the sidelines of this war. She could no longer be the protected one. She could no longer run. Dominic was bleeding because of her. Her mother had died because of the truth she carried. And if Ava didn't rise, didn't fight, didn't take her share of the burden, then every sacrifice would dissolve into nothing. For the first time, Ava felt the weight of responsibility settle into her hands like a stone. And for the first time, she truly understood her fate, and the collapse of the Martelli syndicate now rested entirely in the choice she would make. The car trembled lightly as it turned onto an empty stretch of road, the distant wail of police sirens echoing like the chaotic heartbeat of a city that never learned how to sleep. Ava sat beside Dominic, her eyes fixed on the blood seeping through the temporary bandage wrapped around his side. Dominic winced but never complained, his gaze locked on the road ahead, as if the storm of the night could not move him from the path he had already chosen. But Ava knew that if she did not speak now, she might never have the chance again. Dominic, she whispered, steadying herself against the seat. I've made my decision. Dominic turned toward her, his eyes sharpening as though he were trying to read her answer before she gave it. No more hiding. No more running. Ava drew a long breath, her eyes shining in the shadows of the moving car. I'm going to fight. With you. With what my mother started. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, so long it felt like the world was pausing between 2 heartbeats. In his eyes there flickered something that looked like a mix of relief and solemnity. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He simply accepted it. Ava, once you step into this darkness, there is no coming back. I know, she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. Dominic nodded once, final and certain. Good. Then let's find the man who forced your mother to die. One of his men in the front seat turned around quickly. Boss, the source just confirmed it. Marco Marcelli is trying to leave the city tonight. They're gathering at the Brooklyn docks. Dominic straightened, pain tightening his jaw, but never touching the fire in his eyes. They know they're exposed, and they'll run before the whole thing explodes. He motioned for the driver to accelerate, then turned back to Ava with a voice that cut clean through the rumble of the engine. Do you understand? This is our only chance to stop them. If they leave New York, Ava closed her hands into fists. They'll come back. They'll kill me. They'll wipe away every trace, and my mother will die all over again. Dominic looked at her not as a crime lord, but as a man evaluating a warrior taking her first step into the fire. Ava reached into her coat, pulled out the metal box her mother had left behind and rested it on her lap. Her fingertips drifted over the lid as if searching for a last remnant of her mother's warmth. Everything she protected is in here, and I won't let it die with her. Dominic nodded. Good. Then tonight we finish it. As the car approached Brooklyn, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of the river and the tension of unfinished battles. In the distance, the flickering dock lights reflected over the murky sweep of the East River. Dominic picked up the radio. "Bring everyone into position. I want the south route sealed and 2 teams on the rooftops. Do not let them board that ship," a voice answered through static. "Yes, boss." Dominic faced Ava again, his tone dropping lower. "When we get there, you do not leave my side. You don't wander. You don't step out of my sight, not even for a second." Ava nodded. "I won't be a burden to you." Dominic looked at her briefly. "No. Tonight you're not the burden. Tonight you're the reason." His words struck something deep inside her. For the first time, Ava understood that this wasn't just about her mother or Dominic or the sins buried in the past. It was also about her, about who she would become after all of this. As the car turned into the narrow lane leading toward the docks, Ava saw Dominic's men already stationed in the shadows, their silhouettes merging with the night, silent and disciplined, like soldiers who had long accepted the thin line between life and death. Dominic opened the door, his steps firm despite the blood soaking through his shirt. Ava stepped out beside him, the cold river wind brushing against her face like a final warning. Dominic turned to her, eyes sharp enough to slice through the darkness. "Are you ready?" Ava pressed the metal box to her chest, her gaze steady as she looked toward the towering stacks of containers and the flickering lights of the ship Marcelli planned to escape on. Then she spoke calmly, almost eerily steady. "Ready. Let's finish this, Dominic." And Dominic Kane, bleeding resolute, born from the shadows yet standing beside her, nodded once. Together they stepped into the heart of the Brooklyn docks, toward the men preparing to flee, toward the truth that had killed her mother, and toward the night where justice would finally be reclaimed. The cold wind from the East River struck Ava and Dominic as they pushed deeper into the docks, where the sickly yellow light spilled over stacked containers, rising like silent metal walls. The low rumble of a freighter's engine rolled through the night, signaling that the Marcelli men were moments away from slipping out of the city. Dominic motioned for his men to spread out, each shadow disappearing into narrow passageways, sealing off every possible escape route. Ava stayed close at his side, her hand clutching the metal box against her chest. Her heartbeat trembling with tension, though her eyes shone with the resolve of someone who had decided she would never step backward again. From behind the distant rows of containers, silhouettes began to shift. Men in dark coats, guns strapped at their sides, moving with a blend of urgency and awareness. And at the center of them was Marco Marcelli, silver hair, a face carved by guilt and power, the man her mother had spent an entire lifetime running from. Dominic tightened his grip on Ava's wrist and pulled her behind a container as 2 guards passed by. Then he lowered his head near her ear, his voice deep and decisive. "When I signal you, you send everything to the FBI. Once they have it, the game changes immediately." Ava nodded, unlocking her phone with fingers trembling from adrenaline but not fear. Dominic held her gaze for one brief second, as if giving her the last piece of strength she might need, and then stepped out of their hiding place. 3 seconds later, gunfire tore through the air. Dominic shot down 2 guards instantly, and the shadows of his men surged forward like a storm breaking loose in the night. Marco spun around, shouting, "Shoot him! Don't let anyone leave alive!" Chaos erupted. Muzzles flared with bursts of light, smoke mingled with the river mist, and every footstep echoed with desperation. Dominic returned fire, his aim precise, but his movements visibly slowed by the loss of blood. He gritted his teeth, forced to take cover behind a rusted bollard as a barrage of bullets chipped away the concrete near his head. He was pinned down, unable to advance. Ava slipped behind another container, opened the metal box, and photographed every document, every page of the notebook, every piece of evidence her mother had sacrificed her life to secure. Then she hit send. FBI, New York Federal Organized Crime Task Force. As the files began to upload, a shiver ran down Ava's spine. A voice suddenly rose behind her, sharp enough to cut through the din. "You weren't supposed to do that, Ava." She spun around only to find a gun aimed right between her eyes. One of Martelli's senior enforcers, his face twisted with hatred. "You should have handed over the box. Maybe then I'd let you die quickly." Ava backed up until her spine hit the cold steel, her fingers digging into the heavy metal box in her hands. As the man's finger tightened on the trigger, instinct took over. Ava didn't scream. Instead, she swung the heavy box with all her remaining strength, smashing it hard against the gunman's wrist. The gun went off wild, the bullet striking the sky. The man roared in pain and raised his hand to strike her, but before he could, a gunshot cracked through the air. He collapsed at her feet, eyes frozen in the shock of his final moment. Dominic stood behind him, breath uneven, blood seeping from his side, yet his gaze sharp as forged steel. "I told you not to leave my sight." Ava choked on a breath, but Dominic didn't wait for her reply. He pulled her to her feet. "Come on, it's almost over." At that moment, FBI sirens wailed from the distance, red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. Federal agents swept into the docks from the southern road, the very path Dominic had forced them toward by ensuring Ava's evidence reached them in time. Marco Marcelli stumbled backward toward the edge of the pier, his face draining of color as he saw the FBI closing in at the same time. Dominic's men sealed the final exits. "You picked the wrong man to cross Kane." Dominic stepped toward him, not raising his gun, not even lifting a hand, just looking at the man who had condemned Lena to a life of fear. "No, you picked the wrong family to mistake for dead." Marco didn't get the chance to respond. Federal agents rushed in, forcing him to the ground, handcuffs locking around his wrists, with a final metallic snap. One by one, the Marcelli soldiers were stripped of their weapons and driven to their knees. The boats they had prepared were surrounded, and the entire Marcelli syndicate, built over decades of blood and corruption, collapsed in a single night. When the last gunshot faded and the final pair of handcuffs clicked shut, Ava stood still at the center of the dock. The wind cut across her face, but inside her chest bloomed a strange warmth, as if Lena were standing just behind her, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder and smiling with quiet pride. Dominic walked toward her, staggering a little from the wound, but still standing tall beneath the strobing lights, like a man born to walk through fire without falling. Ava looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "My mother did her part. And tonight, I did mine." Dominic gave the smallest nod, his eyes softening for the briefest moment in the midst of all the wreckage. "Yes. And you changed the entire war, Ava." FBI vehicles carried Marco Marcelli away from the pier, their sirens gradually fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence Ava recognized not as the end of everything, only the end of the fear that had haunted her family for 25 years. As for the story between her and Dominic, that was only just beginning. 6 months had passed since the night the Brooklyn pier burned with flashing red and blue lights, and the click of handcuffs closed the final chapter of a criminal empire that had once forced so many to live in fear. New York City was still loud, still smothered in smoke and urgency, still pulsing with its relentless rhythm. But for Ava, everything had changed forever. Marino's, the place where it all began, was no longer the quiet restaurant where she carried plates of pasta through exhausting shifts. Ava stood behind the polished wooden bar, adjusting her new nameplate, the one that read in careful engraving, "Ava Collins, Restaurant Manager." Every employee who walked past greeted her with genuine respect, not because Dominic Kane stood behind her, but because of the courage, strength, and kindness she had proven over the past half-year. Marino's was peaceful now, its tables full each night, and not a single shadow of danger lurked in its corners. Dominic had kept his word. He had turned Marino's into the safest place in Little Italy, a refuge so secure that even the most reckless street wolves hesitated before stepping close. That afternoon, after reviewing the dinner shift and reminding Enzo about the new menu, Ava put on her coat and stepped out. She did not tell anyone where she was going, but Dominic knew. He simply watched her figure pass across the glass door and gave a small nod, quiet as a blessing. Ava reached Greenwood Cemetery just as the sun was sinking behind the tall buildings, painting the sky in soft bands of orange like an old day, stretching one last warm embrace. The stone path leading to her mother's grave was as silent as always, the dry leaves whispering beneath her steps. She stopped in front of the marker bearing the name Lena Collins, the woman who had spent her entire life running, protecting, sacrificing, and loving her daughter in the quietest way possible. Ava knelt and placed a bouquet of white lilies on the dew-kissed grass. The late afternoon chill touched her skin, but her heart warmed slowly as she looked at the name carved in stone. "Mom, I'm here." Her voice trembled slightly, but it did not break. "I'm not running anymore, not afraid anymore. You taught me that sometimes silence is the strongest reminder to stand tall. I want you to know that everything you protected, everything you sacrificed, I understand now. I didn't let your life end without meaning." Ava drew a deep breath and lifted her gaze to the deep violet sky behind the rows of trees. "I've met the people you once trusted. Rosa told me about your life when you were young, about the bravery you carried even when facing death. And Dominic. He kept his promise to you for more than 25 years. Today he is family to me as well." A gentle breeze stirred the thin branches overhead, as if Lena were answering her. Ava smiled softly. "I've learned that not everyone who steps into your life is a threat. Sometimes a whisper in the dark is not a warning at all. Sometimes it is a promise that you are no longer alone." She stood up, straightened the flowers, then stepped back. "Mom, thank you for fighting until your last breath so that I could have a better life. I promise I will keep living for the both of us." When Ava walked away from the cemetery, the night settled over the sky like a quiet veil, yet her heart felt brighter than it ever had. At the gate, Dominic's familiar black car was waiting. He didn't ask where she had gone or what she had said. He simply opened the door for her. Ava looked at him and gave a gentle nod. Dominic returned it with the steady gaze of a man who had never once broken his word. "Sometimes a whisper is not a threat," Ava said softly, echoing the words she had spoken to her mother. Dominic looked straight ahead, his voice low and certain like a vow. "It is a promise." And she knew he was right. Thank you for listening to this emotional story. If it brought you reflections on family sacrifice and courage, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it so these meaningful stories can reach even more people. How do you feel about Ava's journey, about the quiet power of a mother's love, and the unexpected places protection can come from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would be grateful to hear the honest feelings from each of your hearts. Wishing everyone watching this a life of good health, joy, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.